Good morning, everyone. Good morning, and welcome back. Welcome back to another PorscheCooled podcast where we talk about all things Porsche. It's owners' stories today. It's Tuesday. It's owners' stories. Well, it's not Tuesday here at the moment. This is actually, I'll let you in on a secret. It's actually Thursday at 6:45 in the morning here in London, and I'm about to connect with Paul in New Zealand. Paul's got an interesting story. He's got a few cars. They may all be Porsches. They may not. So we're gonna get Paul connected up very, very shortly. But I just want to say thank you for supporting the PorscheCooled podcast. Thank you for supporting owners' stories. It seems you guys really, really like hearing other owners chat about their Porsches. So I'm trying to hook up organize, I should say, as many people as I can for you guys over the coming few weeks. I've got some good ones coming up. If you want to be on the owner stories, if you want to be on this PorscheCooled owner stories episode, we just connect by Zoom. I do all the recording. All you have to do is chat with me. It's really easy. We do it for about an hour, and the hour goes very, very quickly. It doesn't have to be an hour, but it tends to be an hour with most people that I've done. Like I said, this is number 11 of owner stories, so we're getting up there. And we're going to talk to Paul very shortly. So let me just get the Zoom organized. Like I said, my name is Michael Barth. This is PorscheCooled Owner Stories number 11. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to the PorscheCooled podcast. I just wanted to say before I introduce Paul, if you want to be on Owner Stories, I didn't actually mention it in the beginning intro. If you want to be on Owner Stories, you can just reach out to me on Instagram. It's probably the best. So you just PorscheCooled on Instagram. When you're there, give us a follow as well, or michael.barth. So if you contact me there, and if you want to be on the owner stories and chat about your Porsche, just reach out to me, and I will get back to you. Sometimes it takes a couple of days, but I will get back to you. So today, like I said, this is owner stories number 11, and I want to welcome Paul to the podcast today. Paul is coming all the way from New Zealand. It's evening there. How are you, Paul?
I'm very well, thank you.
So Paul reached out to me on Facebook the other day. Not the other day. I missed your message, actually, Paul. Sorry about that. So Paul reached out to me, and Paul has a couple of Porsches, but we're going to get into that, and we're going to let Paul tell us what he has. He also has something else which I think is really cool, and I think you guys will as well. He has another car which is not a Porsche, but we'll get into that shortly. So Paul, I'll always like to start these. So you're in New Zealand, right? So you're in Auckland, or you're somewhere else?
Yes, I'm in Auckland.
Are you in Auckland? Great.
Yeah.
And New Zealand is probably the safest place in the world at the moment as well, isn't it? I mean, it seems to be one of those places where everyone wants to go to. It's either Auckland or Australia, isn't it?
Yeah. We seem to be doing very well on the COVID count, being relatively COVID-free. And we seem to be getting a lot of expat New Zealanders coming back into New Zealand. So although we're not getting the tourism, we're getting a lot of Kiwis come home.
Yeah, I can understand why. Okay, so let's get into the Porsche. Let's get into the chat. So, like I said, I always like to start owner stories with your first memory, Paul, of seeing a 911. You know, some people. In fact, the last couple of episodes I've had of the people who have been on owner stories hasn't really been. It's been a later thing in life for them where they've got their first Porsche later in life. So, but let's go back. Childhood memories. Is Porsche something that you had when you were a kid? Did you have a relative that owned a car? Was it something that you always wanted to buy? What was it that got you into the brand?
So yes, I've got a strong injection of Porsche into my childhood. So my first vivid memory of a Porsche. So I was born in 1975, and I remember being about 6 or 7 years old, and my dad going into a Mercedes-Benz dealership to buy a family car, and there was probably a brand new or almost brand new black on black 930 turbo, and as a 6/7-year-old boy, that left a pretty impressive image in my mind. I can very clearly remember that car.
Fantastic. So after that, what happened then? You saw this, and you probably saw the pinnacle as well at the time, right? The 930 turbo. Like, we start at the top. We start at the top with the vivid memory. So then you see that car, and then when did you start thinking, okay, I want to buy a Porsche, I want to buy a 911? When did that happen? Was that a recent thing, or was that that
Oh
many years
no, no,
ago?
no, no. Ever since around about that age. So I was fortunate in that my dad had nice cars and sports cars when I was a kid and growing up. So on that particular trip, he took a more sensible approach and purchased a Mercedes. But when I was about 10 years old, my dad purchased his first 911, which was a 1973 911E Targa in, I think you call it signal orange.
Oh, okay.
So
So the pick of the colors as well, the color that
yeah, so it was
everyone.
uber. It's uber fashionable now, and it was probably uber fashionable in its day. But in the mid '80s, it was just sort of sliding out of uber fashionableism. So yeah, so it basically was. It was orange with a. I remember it had like orange and brown stripe interior cloth, and I can sort of vividly remember being in that car with my dad and my mum and sister, and that there was actually a family. It was actually the only family car for a moment. So yes, I kind of have a vivid memory of that. So my dad was a car nut ever since I can remember,
Right.
and there were Porsche books and car magazines, sports car magazines around ever since I can remember. So I guess that's where that firsthand love affair with Porsches came along. And, back then my dad sort of promptly joined the Porsche Club. And I can remember I can remember attending Porsche Club events and early race meetings. This is probably now into the mid to late 80s as as a 12-year-old slash early teenager. So I kind of had quite a of 911s and Porsches from a very early age. And my dad, he as one of his friends affectionately jokes, he changed his cars more often than he changed his underwear. And he's probably had about 30 Porsches now, and most of them are generally. Sorry.
Oh, he's had over 30 Porsches.
Yeah, correct. 33. Oh, yeah. He's
Wow.
So and not necessarily two or three or a mass collection. He would just basically flip in and out of them every sort of 12 months to 2 years. So I've been fortunate enough for my dad to have a lot of long hood 911s. Um,
Yes.
he had probably about 3 or 4 SCs in the day. He had a 3 litre 930 turbo. He's had 944s, 924s, 924 turbos, a 928, 968.
Wow. So he really went through, he really does have that passion for Porsche. So that's where you got it from. So when you were a kid,
Yeah.
this that's probably a kid's dream, isn't it? To have that car in your life, to have something like a Porsche that your dad is driving. So when you eventually get your license, does he let you drive the current Porsche at the time, or had he sold the Porsche by then?
No, yes, he did. So what did he have back then? I think I drove a couple of the 911 SCs. I remember driving the 3 litre turbo. I remember driving one of the 944s. And then, sort of at that stage, I was I left home at about 18. So once I sort of grew up and sort of went out into the big wide world, he still had cars, but I probably didn't drive them so much. And he, there was a stage where he no longer owned Porsches and went to another marque. And he was into Ferraris for a while there and had those for a bit. So generally, since I've had my driver's license, most of the cars he's owned, I've been able to drive at some stage.
Okay, so you had a really good introduction to Porsche, and I just maybe you should just tell the people. I mean, Paul is very heavily involved in the Porsche community in New Zealand. So, can you just tell the listeners about that, Paul? Because it kind of makes sense now when you talk about your upbringing in your childhood with the cars that your dad has owned.
Yeah, so there's a bit of a term that someone has coined where I'm a second generation club member. So the Porsche Club in New Zealand was started in 1975, and there are now people who have had children that were effectively born or young when they first got their Porsches, and their kids are now Porsche Club members, and I would be one of that the second generation. I'm not sure if we've got quite a third generation yet. I'd have to work on my daughters, but yeah. So I kind of I could afford my first Porsche when I was about 31, 32. So I've sort of had them for about 13 years now, and I sort of promptly joined the Porsche Club back in about 2009, I think, when I first got my own Porsche, and have been a club member since. And I'm now the current president of the New Zealand Porsche Club.
That's a big responsibility, Paul.
Yeah, it's a 1 day a week job. It's certainly not as big as say an American Porsche club or even an Australian, one of the Australian regional Porsche clubs. But in New Zealand, we've got just on 800 members, and I think it equates to about 1 day a week's work.
Yeah, no, I looked at the Porsche Club. I want to get to your cars, but I did look at the Porsche Club New Zealand website just to have a look at. I have a look at the cars that were at the events and have a look at the images and stuff. I noticed you took some of the images at those events. It looks like there's a really nice mix of really nice mix of cars, a really nice mix of people. It seems like it's and there's some really nice cars there too. So the Porsche passion is very strong in New Zealand, it seems.
Yeah, it's very strong. You know, we've got a club race series that's been going since, as a formal race series since 1987. There are obviously club members racing prior to that, and we have regional chapters throughout New Zealand. So New Zealand's a long, narrow country, and in all the main centres we've got regional chapters, and then we've sort of got remote outlying areas. We've got smaller chapters of it might be 30 to 50 club members. So the Porsche community in New Zealand is definitely very strong.
Yeah, it looks good. So let's go back. Let's go back to that first 911. So you obviously start working, or you have the funds, and you decide to buy something. So when you bought your first 911, it was a used 911. What did you go searching for?
Yes, absolutely. So my first 911 was a 1976 Carrera 3-litre coupe, a 5-speed, and it was not quite a barn find. It's probably what I'd call a suburban garage find. So it was my wife was selling bathrooms at the time, and she had a customer that she spec'd a bathroom for, and he invited us around in the weekend to have a look at that project when it was finished. And I just happened to spy in his garage this black 911 with a whale tail, and that sort of got me wildly animated and excited at the time, and all enthused. And we sort of, instead of looking at the bathroom, we ended up spending 2 hours in the garage talking Porsches. And it was quite good because that person, is a good friend of mine, Graham, and he's sort of become one of my best friends, although he doesn't own a Porsche anymore. And so I kind of knew of that car. I couldn't afford it at the time that I first met him in the car, but sort of we were friends, and sort of over about a 3 or 4 year period, there'd be a bit of a banter about me pining to buy the car.
Yep.
And then, he didn't really want to sell it. And then there'd be a moment where he'd want to sell it, and I couldn't quite put the funds together at the time. And there was a bit of this going on for a while. And then there was sort of a one day, he said to me, so, he's also into American cars. And he said, Paul, it's going to go. You've either sort of got a man up, or you're going to lose the window of opportunity. And at that stage, I decided to bite the bullet. So yeah, and the rest is history from there.
So you had that car. You enjoyed it for how long, Paul? How long did you own that one for?
I think I had it for about 4 or 5 years. Yeah, I love that car to bits. So when I first brought it, it was a very original and tired car. So that was before Carrera 3 litres became expensive and desirable things. Back then, they were sort of the bottom of the 911 rung.
I was going to ask you that, actually, if you bought it at the right time, and I think obviously you did.
Yeah, but I didn't sell it at the right time.
Okay. So it doesn't make up for it. Yes.
Yeah, so when I brought it, it was basically a car that came with an awful lot of delayed maintenance and drove like a ropey 911. And sort of when I sort of took it for a little drive around the block and didn't really get to take it for a proper drive before I brought it. And it's funny, I could sort of remember the first time I took it for a proper drive. That's where I sort of jumped in it and took a 2.5 hour trip to my parents' house down the road. And sort of 1.5 hours into the trip, I was like, oh, this is maybe not quite the Porsche dream that I experienced. It had a whole lot of delayed maintenance. It was noisy. It was sloppy on the road. The brakes didn't work particularly well. And it was an older car, and I remember having this vivid thought, thinking maybe I should have taken the next step to something like a 964. It might have been a bit more modern, because at the time my daily driver was an Audi S4, the 2.7 TT. So that car was miles faster. It braked a lot better. It did a whole lot more. And I guess I was still, because I'm not used to owning Porsches, then I still had this dream that a Porsche was a rocket ship and should blow the pants off everything, and this car wasn't doing that at the time. So I guess to cut a long story short, over the period that I had that car, one of the first things I did when I joined the Porsche Club was do a driver training day, and that was an instant hit of what I call track cocaine as opposed to crack cocaine, where I got an injection of adrenaline of going to the track, and I was instantly hooked on doing track days and doing events at speed in cars, and basically I started on a long process of effectively improving the performance of that car. So that was a total suspension rebuild, going through like turbo torsion bars and going through the Elephant Racing online tick box and ticking basically everything you can for, I think it was like the track one option, I think it was. And so we went through and basically, rebuilt all the suspension. I got from Stan Adler in Australia some SSIs and a Dansk muffler, and we went through and pulled a bit of weight out of it and just dialed the car right in. So all of a sudden, you kind of had a C3 that was now a track-focused car that was, running around with, track pads and sticky tires, the stickiest road legal tires you could get, and it was now quite a nimble little weapon. So and I really love that because you'd go to the track and yes, you were underpowered in straight line, but you'd come up against cars that were still softer in suspension, things like 996s and 997s, which were new back then, and you'd be all over them through the corners, and you'd be slingshotting out of a corner quicker, and you'd kind of go up the inside of them until the sheer horsepower would kick in, and then they'd kind of grab you at the end of the straight. So I did and a lot of track days in that, and I did target tours in it, and yeah, I love that car to bits. So that was a fantastic car.
So when was the point then? This car, you've got it. You've spent quite a bit of money on it. You've got it tweaked to perfection. You've made it your track car. When was the point when you were driving it and you thought, okay, I've got to change it up now. I've got to get rid of this car.
So there's a term that I affectionately call. So in New Zealand, I've got a whole group of friends that we all do track days together and B road drives, and go for a weekend and drive a couple of hours through twisty roads up north or south, and stay at someone's holiday home or a hotel and make a weekend of it, like boys' weekends.
Yes.
And this group of friends, some of us have got older cars and some of us have got more modern cars, and there's a term that I affectionately called an arms race, where we all wanted to go quicker, and the best way to go quicker, because you run out of natural talent pretty quickly, was to buy it. And you either buy it through suspension and car modifications, or we just buy something that goes quicker. And I think I always liked 993s, and there was a 993 C2 6-speed manual, which was New Zealand new. And New Zealand new cars are very rare. Most of our older cars come out of the UK or out of Australia, and it was a car that it just ticked a lot of ticks. So I kind of thought it was a time to make a jump forward. There were a couple of things that I kind of made me fall out of love with the C3 a little bit. So I always knew it was a little bit rare and a desirable car, and I was probably a little bit ahead of the curve in buying one of those and setting it aside. And one of the things I did at a track day was I basically buzzed the engine. I put a rod through the case, and I know now I could get a replacement case and restamp it, but back then I didn't know I could do that, and I ended up putting a 204 horsepower SC engine in it. So I now have a Carrera 3 with an SC engine in it. So it wasn't quite I kind of broke it, if that makes sense, and it wasn't quite the same. So I kind of reached a point whether I kept spending money on this car to try and make it go faster, or whether I just had a new adventure and got something that was a little bit more modern and naturally quicker, and I chose the latter, and to go for a new adventure.
So you went to the 993. So the 993 was used, or it was brand new? Used?
No, it was used. It was so the 99. Yeah, so it was a 2005 C2 manual, and basically, with that car, I was still doing. I was still going to the track on a regular basis, etc. And with that car, it was basically a very original car, but it was sitting on 20-year-old suspension. And 993s, when the suspension's not fresh and good in them. They don't handle particularly well. I use the term they kind of crab walk around corners. They're a bit funny.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
so kind of with the 993, they're actually surprisingly quiet and soft car. They're noticeably quieter than like a 964 and softer to drive. And so I had another friend at the time who had pretty significantly modified 993 C2, and he redone all the suspension, put PSS Thames in it, and semi-solid everything through it, and Vista mufflers and
Yep.
called golden rods and short shift this and a whole lot of other things. And basically I'd driven his car, and his car was just had a light and flight wheel. It was just a wonderful. It was like driving a 993 RS effectively.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, it sounds like if you've listened to the podcast with Steve, it sounds like what Steve did to his 993, which is pretty much what he did too. He put those RS components. He changed all the suspension out. Was one of the first things he did. He put the Vista on. So it seems like there's a common thread with changes to the 993. Yeah.
Yeah, and it really wakes them up. And then they're weapons. Then they go really, really well. And so basically, I went through a process of doing all of those mods for the car. But for as much as I really, really liked 993s back then, I still do now. It's just a car I never really bonded with, if that makes sense. I never really fell in love with it. And
Right.
there were just things I didn't quite like about it. I didn't quite like the spec of it. It was polar silver with a grey interior. And I wasn't, I don't mean to knock cars and specs. We all have different taste, but wasn't quite my cup of tea. And I kept doing things to it and modifying it, thinking if I did that, I'd kind of love it more. And it's a bit like the analogy I use, it's a bit like trying to make a relationship work that shouldn't, and you just can't force them to work. And it was just a car that I never, although I acknowledge a 993 is a very good car, it was just a car that I didn't personally bond with super well.
What year did you buy the 993?
About 2015, I think. 14, 15, something like that.
2015, okay. And at the time, you weren't tempted to get into a 964 instead of the 993? And I only say that because the common conversation with which one is better.
I have a bit of a giggle because I think 964s are a great car, but I think 964s are what I call Porsche fashion. So, like when I first brought my Carrera 3, 964s weren't that desirable. They were these things that were really expensive to maintain, and they all had leaks and they were ropey, and it was an expensive Porsche you didn't want to own. And, if you look at things like Total 911 magazines and whatnot, all around the late 2008, 2010, they do like comparisons with like a 3.2 Carrera and a 964. And the articles would all say back then, like the 3.2 was the better, more purist car and all of these sorts of things. And then I think there's been an era of 964s becoming uber fashionable, and the right people in Porsche circles buying them, and everybody else saying, "Me too, I want one." If you go back 10 years ago, people would have said, "Oh, they got kind of ugly bumpers," and it's certainly not as good as a 993. If you saw a 964, 993 article 10 years ago, everyone would say, "Go buy the 993, save your pennies and go buy the 993," sort of thing. So
yeah, absolutely.
So I like 964s. I think they are good-looking cars. I've driven a couple of them. There's a couple of opportunities I could have had to buy one, and I sort of passed on it. I guess at that particular time, there was no 964 C2 manual for me to buy that ticked the boxes. And I really did like the 993. I still think the 993 has the nicest looking rear end of the 911 range, that rear 3/4 angle with the one that's slightly lowered. It's just a very sexy car. I think the front of them are a little bit soft and bubbly these days. I do prefer the more classical 911 with the upright headlights.
Okay, so the 993, when you bought the 993, you bought it, do you start tweaking it? Do you think, okay, I'm going to make this better?
Absolutely, yeah. I probably would have dropped 20k into it pretty quickly. I was on Elephant Racing website and buying a lot of parts off the name escapes me now, one of the American sites, and importing bits hand over fist. And basically, as bits came in, I would I'd bolt them onto the car. So like the Carrera 3 was a project that took about 3 years to do. The 996, I kind of once I'd gone through that process of discovery and knew what I like to make a car work well, I was just basically ticking the box, and the boxes were flying into New Zealand as quickly as they could. It was basically done and dusted within 6 months from the car I first bought to the
Okay.
final evolution of it.
And what was the difference on the track with that car when you took the 993 right to the track? What was the difference on the track compared to the Carrera 3?
The night and day. I actually really, really liked the 993 on the track. It's the way the car was set up. It was very neutral. It has ABS. It's got good big brakes on it. You're running bigger tires on it, so it just stopped. It's got a wider track, so it's going through corners quicker, and it's got a lot more torque. So in my little C3 on the local New Zealand tracks that I do, I was circulating in say 1 minute 19,
Right.
and then in the 993 I could just get into the 115s, which was pretty quick time. Actually, that's the other interesting thing when you talk about the 964 993 comparison. One of the things that I do know is a 993 is certainly a quicker car. When you've got a 964, that's on a like-for-like setup, so something that's basically RS spec in a 964. The ones that I see in New Zealand, a couple of seconds slower, although the non-Vario Ram 993s basically have the same engine as the 964, which is interesting.
So you're driving the 993, and I'm going to refer back to James on a previous owner stories. James, who had the Cup car, and who has the Cup cars, I should say, and lots of Porsches like you, experienced transaxles and water cooled and air cooled. And he says, on the track you eventually outdrive the car, and I guess that's what happened. I guess that's what's happened with you with the Carrera, right? You outdrive, your skill level gets better, and then you want something more. So you're in the 993. When does it get to a point that you think, okay, this is still not enough, I want something more?
So I did get something more, and I had the 993 at the same time. So the something more that came along was, and this is before they all skyrocketed in value and were in that sort of unloved state, was I brought a 996 Gen 2 GT3 with a club sport spec. So I'd had the half cage and the buckets, and and basically I brought that car, and that became the track weapon. And then the 993, when I first brought it, it was still on its original paint, but it had been touched up a couple of times. I think the bumper had been sprayed and the bonnet had been sprayed a couple of times. It looked like one of the guards had been sprayed. And when you looked at the car hard, because it was a metallic polar silver, you could sort of see the different shades of paint. And so basically I chose to soften off the 993 a little bit and repaint it at the time, and tidy it all up, make it what I'd call a show pony car. And the thing that sort of broke me on the 993 was, so I kind of always struggled to love that car. As I sort of previously said, it was, you keep, if I buy this one little bit, this, change the steering wheel, do something, maybe it's just the difference between loving it and not loving it. And so cut a long story short, I painted it, and it was all of a sudden a very, very tidy, example of one of these cars. And then I took it away for a long weekend with the new paint, and the New Zealand roads have got quite a rough chip on them. And I kid you not, by the end of the weekend, I came back and the front of the car had about like 30 stone chips on it, like major chips back to the primer. And that kind of made me realize that I'm not a concourse car type guy. I like them, and I like to own the cars rather than the cars own me and get upset when they're stone chipped, etc. So basically I took it in, I got it repainted and got it all mint again, and touched up the front guards and the bonnet, and at that point there I'd kind of made a decision that we were to part ways, and sold the car. I sort of had the GT3 for my new adrenaline fix, and actually there's a little bit more to the story than that. So the 993 got swapped out for another car, and the 993 got swapped out for a 1987 911 Carrera G50.
Okay.
Which is red over cream. And this car is, So it's got a whale tail on it, the front spoiler, and it's that quintessential 1980s yuppie era Porsche that, and basically it was a poster car for me when I was a kid. And there was a New Zealand new example with a lowish mileage, but one not too low to be you'd be afraid to put miles on it. And it was all original, basically, except for the front valance, and it's all original paint, and it had an all original interior. And it's just a very honest car. And I sort of thought to myself at the time, it's a car I'd been chasing on and off over time. I find that cars I want to own don't just magically come up for sale. Somebody owns it at the moment, and you have to tap on the shoulder and politely bug them every 6 to 12 months until they decide to sell. And so there was this car that kind of escaped me a couple of times that sort of I really liked. It was a beautiful quintessential Porsche from my childhood era. This is what a 911 is, and a red car with a whale tail, and basically I kind of had a thought process at the time, and I sort of said they were worth the same. The cars had similar mileages and worth the same money. And I said to myself, if I walked into the local Porsche dealership and they were all shinied up, inside the showroom, and they were the same money, which one would I gravitate towards? Which one would I want? And the answer was I'd take the 3.2 Carrera. It's just, to my eye, it's the G series Porsche with the impact bumpers is the quintessential 911. It's the car of when I was a kid. And,
so 87, is this the red one, Guards Red?
Yeah.
87 Guards Red G50. So the perfect, the perfect spec, really. The classic spec, the period correct spec.
Correct.
So the 993, so you sell the 993.
Yep.
So you sold the 993. So then you still have the 996.2 GT3.
Correct.
Is that a car that you enjoyed on I know there's great roads in New Zealand. Is that a car you enjoyed on the twisty roads around New Zealand as well as the track, or was it primarily a track-focused car that you used it for?
No, not on twisty roads. So the 996 GT3 was a love-hate relationship. I don't own it anymore. It is a car that some people, if you get people sit there and say, oh, the new Porsches are a bit soulless, they don't have the character of an older Porsche. Yep. A 996 era GT3 has character on steroids. So it is a polarizing car that you either like or you don't like. It's just raw and everything is more. And so the 996 GT3 is just amazing on the track. It is just, when you're winding the thing out to 8,400 RPM and you're just going for it. It's a magnificent car. That's what they're designed to do, and that Mezzo engine and the sound and the rawness and even things like the harnesses pinging on the half gauge and when you turn into a driveway and you're lifting a front wheel because the car's so taut in suspension, it does all these wonderful things that in the appropriate place it is just an amazing car, and it certainly has character. But on a B road in New Zealand, they're dangerous would be the word I would use. And I have many frightening moment stories. So I can remember when I first got it and I was sort of showing off with a mate. We'd sort of just, we'd got a coffee each and we were sitting off on a B road. And I went over the brow of a hill and I didn't know that it was a brow. And the car literally got airborne, and next minute his head's hitting the roof on the car and the coffee's going everywhere through the car, and the car kind of lands on a slight angle. Instead of landing at 12 o'clock, it kind of lands at about 10:30, kind of having to catch it and correct it. And so this wasn't us being idiots on the road. This is just us, on a B road where you can do 100 kilometers an hour or 63 miles an hour sort of thing, just being caught out by a B road with a brow and the car not having the suspension travel to cope with it. And there are a couple of instances on sort of B roads where the car was just too stiff to cope with roads, and because it was too stiff, it would become dangerous. So it wasn't really a car I would use on B roads because of that.
Do you think it's a mistake? You know how people, everyone wants a GT car at the moment. You know what I mean? From the 991 GT3, all of a sudden everyone wants a GT car, GT3, GT2 RS. Do you think it's a mistake for people who haven't had a 911 before and go straight in and say, look, I haven't had a 911, I want a GT3, I'm going to go buy a 996.1 or a 996.2 GT3. Do you think that's a mistake?
I don't know if it's a mistake.
Based on the driving experience and the nature of the car?
Yeah, the newer they get, the softer they get. So like a 991 GT3, I've not driven a Gen 2, but I've driven a Gen 1 pretty extensively on B roads in New Zealand. And they're modern enough and the suspension's good enough that they'll cope with it. So that's a B road car. That'll do it. That'll do it all day long. If I was to have any criticism, it would be the sheer size of it on a narrower road.
Right.
And they all get progressively softer. So like with the 997.1, it's a little bit softer, and with a 997.2, it's a little bit softer again. Like I've got a friend who's got a 997.2 GT3 RS, and so
Okay.
that's the rawest of the raw. And I can remember going for a drive. I sort of drove into his house in my 6.2, and we went for a spin down the road in his one. I was thinking, gosh, this is quieter, and the suspension softer. It was far more compliant. So I think the 996 in particular are very raw, and I think as they get newer, they get a bit softer.
Yeah, it comes down to the pack that the 996.1, 996.2 GT3, or even the 997, which is what Steve has. And I think James in a previous owner story said the same thing. He had the 997 GT3 and he had it for 6 months and then he sold it because it wasn't the right car to have just for driving around. Do you know what I mean? It didn't suit the purpose.
Yeah,
And I
I
forget.
would
I think
agree.
what you said. I think what you said is it really does pinpoint the pluses and the minuses of those GT cars. I mean, they are a great car on the track, right? They are still a great car on the track. When you hear from what James says, he says, they're a bit soft compared to the Cup car, but he's used to Cup cars.
Yeah.
But when you use them on the road, you really do have to bear in mind, like you said, the roads where you live, and all of that side of it. And I think that's, because I know a lot of people want, I want a GT3 as well, but I know it has its limitations. I've been in my mate Steve's car and I know its limitations. But there's still something really appealing about that as a second car, right? Not as your main 911.
Yeah. I think when it comes to Porsches, and it is a bit of a case about the luxury about how many you can own, but you've got to, rather than sitting there saying, oh, I want a GT3 or I want a this or I want a that, I think you got to sit there and say, the first thing you got to do is sit there and say, what is the intent of this car and how am I going to use it? And when I talk to friends, Porsche Club friends, and we sort of sit there, we sit there and say, ideally, you need 3 Porsches. You basically need a Sunday cars and coffee type car. It could be a 356 or a long hood, and something that's really shiny and pretty in a pop color that everybody thinks, wow, that's cool. But it might not drive particularly well. It's mobile art.
Yeah.
And then you probably need a modern Porsche because you want something with heated seats that you can jump in and travel, for half a day and get out of it and not feel like you need a nana nap afterwards because it's zapped you. And
Yeah.
then if you're doing track days, you actually need a race car. So you either need to go and get a proper race car that is an out and out race car, or go and get something that's very track focused. I think when things go wrong, and it does come down to budget, is when you try and make one car do many things, because they don't really, certainly
Exactly.
the older ones don't really do it well. So if you're trying to get, like, say, my old Carrera 3 and trying to turn it into a track car, a show pony for Sundays, and then jump on it and do 400 miles, it's just not going to happen. But as they do get newer, it kind of gets easier because the performance, they become so good that they'll naturally do things at the track, etc. But you've got to kind of sit there and say, where do I live, and how am I going to use this car? So I think the other bugbear about the GT3 that I didn't like was because the gearing was so long. The only time I really like the 3.2 Carrera around town because it's not particularly quick, and I can be doing, within the speed limit or a whisker over the speed limit and be riding through the gears and second and third gear and on it and in that torque band and
Yeah.
you're kind of having fun, but without being reckless. The problem with the GT3 was I think it'd do like 130 kilometers an hour in second gear. So unless you're at the racetrack, if you wanted to get a sense of being on it,
Yes.
and in that band and winding it out to 8,400 RPM or whatever it did, the only time you could do it was on the exit of a motorway. And then basically what you're doing is you're dropping the car into third gear and then hitting the brake, hoping there's no cop pilot coming up behind you, sort of thing,
True.
because the car's just so quick. And then you sit, not saying I would do this. Let's just say it was a closed road. Say you found a closed road in the back of nowhere where you could really put foot down and do 200 kilometers an hour. Well, the road's not designed to do that with a car like that. It'll bounce, and so you kind of sit there and say it was a magnificent car at the track, but off the track, although it had all this character and charm and personality and a really strong DNA and what it was all about, it was just too compromised for the road. It's not wife friendly. It's
As the president of the Porsche Club, you
yeah,
have people, I'm guessing, contacting you all the time. I'm guessing people are trying to pick your brain because you've had such a long Porsche history. You're involved in Porsche community in New Zealand in a big way, and they
yeah.
come to you and they say, "What do you think of me buying this car as my first 911? Should I get an air cooled? Should I buy a 70s air cooled that might be a little bit cheaper? 60s ones are too expensive, I guess. But should I buy an air cooled? Should I buy a 996 because the prices are down and they're starting to rise? What
Yeah.
would you say is a perfect? And I know this is a really difficult question, Paul. But what would you say is a really good car for someone to get into Porsche? Do you think it's a 996? Do you think it's the Boxster? Do you think it's a cheap air cooled if you can get a hold of one?
So yeah, the answer is yes to all of those. I think it depends on your budget because they all do sort of jump in $10,000 to $20,000 bands, and in New Zealand dollars. And it depends on whether you want an older car or a more modern car. So so if we were to talk New Zealand dollars, and basically, for those of you who are not New Zealanders, a New Zealand dollar is worth about 70 cents American at the moment, to give you a quick conversion. So like if somebody said, oh, my budget's up to 50K, I'd probably recommend a Cayman or a Boxster, or if they were wanting a 911, well, then the only options are a 996. If it's a little bit more money than that, if you sort of had like, say, $80,000 New Zealand, and they said they wanted a 911, I would sit there and say, well, probably an SC or a 997.1 is a really good entry point car, depending on whether you want to go older school or new school.
Good choice, Paul. Good choice.
Yeah, well, I reckon the 997.1s are sleepers. They're undervalued. They're clearly at the
Yeah.
bottom of the depreciation curve, in my humble opinion.
Yep, I love mine. It's a great car when I get to
Yeah.
drive it, but it's a great car. That's good advice. That's good advice. So you've got your 3.2 Carrera. You've got it in Guards Red. You've still got the 996 GT3, and then
Yeah.
you go, okay, so the GT3 that's it. Do you sell it because you need something? You want to get something better. You want to get an RS. You want to get something faster, or do you go in a different direction?
So the 996 GT3, as I said, was a bit of a polarizing ownership experience. There were moments of ecstasy and moments of fear. And I had an accident with it at the track where basically the front brakes failed on it, and I basically went straight off the track and into a tire wall.
Oh, wow.
And probably hit it at about a good 80 kilometers an hour. And
Right.
and that that was a scary moment. I came out okay, and in New Zealand on track days, it was a track day, it wasn't racing week. You can get track day insurance, so it's got a fairly hefty excess on it, but I didn't have the bill for the repair of the car, and that was kind of a little bit of a scary moment on it. And then I found there were a couple of other. So I got the car fixed, and I kept doing track days in it. And what I found was that and trying to keep up with other people with 996 GT3s and whatnot, there I was probably over driving a little bit. And when the car goes, it's pretty hard to catch. So I kind of had, I had that one, which was a scary moment, which I didn't escape. And then I kind of had a couple of other scary moments, which I did manage to escape. And I kind of wondered whether I was just sort of pushing a bit hard, and denting the car is one thing, but denting yourself is another thing.
Yeah.
And you're sort of going to the track with, in New Zealand dollars, a $120,000, $130,000 car, and there might be a day where it's not insured, or I do something that makes it where the insurance doesn't pay off, and you're like, could I afford to take $130,000 hit and walk away from it? And the answer was probably not. I'd be a bear with a very sore foot if I wrote the car off, and I would. That's a bit of soul searching and very hard to explain to the wife how you wrote $130,000 off.
True. So the car was repairable. It was repairable, and it was fully covered by insurance.
Correct.
So you get then you get it repaired, and then you think maybe I shouldn't keep this anymore.
Yeah, correct. So I sold it, and then for about 18 months, I was just running around on the 3.2 Carrera and sort of put my track day shoes up, and And then I got a 944 race car, and thought that was a better way of going about it. It's, I could do the Porsche race series. There's classic racing series in New Zealand, and I could do track days in it as well. So it was a multi-purpose car, and if I biffed it, you're biffing $25,000-$30,000, and yeah, that hurts, but it's not $130,000 hurt.
Sorry, Paul. What year was that? What was the car? 944.
It's a 1990 944 S2.
944 S2.
Yeah, so it's basically a road-going car that's been stripped out and modified to become a race car. So it's a standard engine with a chip. It's got slightly bigger brakes on it. It's got track suspension, and it's all stripped out, head to toe with a full cage in it and a race seat.
So did you find that more enjoyable on the track than the GT3?
I did actually. I found it more enjoyable than I thought. I kind of always was a bit nervous that it was going to be underpowered, because you kind of hit the back straight with the GT3, and the 385 horsepower or whatever it is kicks in, and it goes like the clappers. And I know it was quicker in a straight line than a 944 race car, and it was quicker doing a lap than a 944 race car.
Right.
But the thing with when you're doing track days, you're basically kind of out there by yourself. There is a little bit of gentleman's racing where you might be someone in a similar powered car, or you get the joy of overtaking something that's slower. And but when you're racing, it's different because you're going into a corner with three abreast cars, and it's more intense, more aggressive, more. The lack of speed is made up in other ways because it's you've got other things in close proximity to you.
Right.
Other cars. It's more about it, more craft to the process. You're not when you're in a road going car and you're trying to do you're trying to get better and better and hone your skills to do the fastest lap that you can. Perfect lines. When you're racing, perfect lines are great when you've not got anybody behind you. Or immediately in front of you. But when you're racing, your lines, those sort of perfect lines all go out the door because you're trying to block. If you took perfect lines, someone would just dive up the inside of you under braking. So it's a totally different driving technique.
So do you still own that? You don't still own that car now, do you?
No, I sold it because I didn't use it. So I kind of owned it 3 years, and I think I did about 3 track days in it. I think I did about 3 race weekends in it. And it was just sitting there in a storage shed, and I was paying rent on it. And, you're paying for it to be regularly maintained. And it wasn't kind of really being used. So right. I kind of thought it was, I just sort of reached, you keep telling yourself, oh yeah, I'll get around to using it. I'll get around to doing this. I'll get around to doing that. And life was just sort of getting in the way with family and other car events and work, and it was sitting there doing nothing. So I recently made the decision to sell it and move it on.
Also, only recently you got rid of that car?
Correct.
And then, okay, so you got the Carrera. So then what follows? Do you need another Porsche in your garage?
Yeah, so I've got one other Porsche in my garage, and it's a current Porsche, and this is I guess the last Porsche in my Porsche series of cars that I've owned to date, and that is I've got a 997.2 GTS 6-speed manual.
Yeah, I know, which is beautiful in your pictures, I have to say. And I was going to ask you that question whether it was manual, because I don't think you told me in the post.
Yeah, it's got to be manual, mate.
And this is the thing. This is the thing about the GTS. Why is it that the New Zealand market received manuals and the Australian market only received PDKs in the 997 GTS?
We didn't.
You didn't?
We didn't. I've imported this car out of the UK.
Oh, you imported it from the UK.
Yeah. So there's a bit of a story with that one. So I've had the 9. So just to kind of recap the overlapping, I've had the 3.2 Carrera for about 5 years now, right. And that won't go anywhere. It's in my wife's name, so that I can't be silly and sell it one day. I've got to come up with a really, really compelling reason for that car to be sold.
Are you sure that's the reason why it's in your wife's name, Paul? It's not your wife's favorite car?
Yeah, she does like it the most. She likes the fact that it's a classic, and she says it's a Porsche with proper headlights. I won't tell you what she calls Porsches without the traditional headlights. I'm interested in this GTS, and I'm interested in keep going, but I'm also interested in how you can import a car that is under 30 years old So in New Zealand, we have different rules. You could actually import a brand new Porsche into New Zealand if you wanted to. So you got to pay taxes and everything else, but there's no input rules with regards to age. So
Okay.
so you've so yeah, so a long story short, I had the 3.2 Carrera for a long time, and the problem, as much as I love that car and it's beautiful, it goes back to that story about what a car does and what its purpose is. So the 3.2 Carrera is is a trip down memory lane so that I can remind myself of the 10-year-old me when I sort of first discovered Porsches and they're in the garage with dad, and that's what a quintessential 911 is to me. It's a very pretty car to my eye. It's something that's very special and personal, and it's something that I cherish. It's definitely a cherished car that I don't think I'd ever sell, but it has its shortcomings. It is, what is it, it's 35 years old, knocking on 35 years old, and it's 33 years old. So it's 33-year-old technology. It's not particularly fast. If you were to do a Sunday drive and it's been 2 hours driving somewhere, jump out for lunch, and then 2 hours driving home, I'm going to be knackered. I'm going to need an afternoon nap. And you're not keeping up with a more modern Porsche. So if I've got friends who are wanting to do a weekend away and they're taking the more modern cars, I'm not really part of that. They'll blow me into the tumbleweeds.
Yeah.
Because it's an old car. It's a classic car. And so what I was thinking was I needed a more modern Porsche, and I had a budget in mind. My budget at the time was about 150,000 New Zealand, and you're sort of sitting there saying, well, I want a more modern Porsche. If I'm brutally honest with you, I'm probably more of an air-cooled guy than a water-cooled guy. I do tend to lean that way. And you're sort of sitting there saying, what do I get for that sort of money that's a special Porsche? What floats my boat? And so I didn't particularly want to do another GT3, even though as much as I really, really like 997.1 and 0.2 GT3s and could happily have one in the garage, they're just a too compromised vehicle for what I wanted to use this car for. And I tried a 991, and no disrespect to 991s, but I just find that platform too big. Right. And sorry, I think you're hearing my dog in the background.
No, it's okay. No trouble.
So you're sort of sitting there saying, what do you get? And I've always thought, to my eye, the 997.2 is the prettiest of the water-cooled 911. So I find it a very attractive car. I really, really like the tail end with the lights, the way they flick up. I like the front end on them. To my eye, it's no disrespect to your car, but I just find them a bit prettier than a Gen 1, but you pay for it, and so I kind of thought this was a great car, and at the same time I was sort of toying up whether I got like a 997.1 turbo, because I could get a manual one of those, and they are something that is in New Zealand. And I kind of, the more I sort of looked and searched things, I kind of set myself on a 997 GTS and a manual one. So I like the look of them. I like the fact they got the X51. They've got the wide body on it. The black car detailing is just the Alcantara. I know it's not a GT3. It's certainly not. It's not a Mexico engine. You really know it. It's a Mexico engine versus a stock 911 engine. They are chalk and cheese, and a Mexico engine is something a whole lot more and a bit more special, in the way it revs. But it's kind of, I sort of sit there and tell myself it's like the happy medium between the two cars, and so I sort of set myself to wanting one of these. And there were, so in New Zealand, only 4 new 997 GTSs came in, and they were all PDK. And they're all pretty highly prized cars and don't really come up for sale. I know 3 of the owners, and they don't want to sell them. They've owned them either since new or near new, and they are perfectly happy with them. And then there was one imported manual car that came out of the UK, and again, I sort of spied it at the dealership when I was getting my car serviced, over the years, and I kind of pestered through the dealership for them to make contact with the owner and see if he'd consider selling it. And they finally humored me in contacting the owner, and the owner sort of said, the owner actually came up with quite an interesting scenario, and I guess it's where I get to a bit with the car. They sort of sit there and say, well, I could sell it. Yep. And then they go, well, what am I going to replace it with? And whatever I replace it with is going to cost me, back at the time, the 911, the 991.2 911 Carrera T had just come out, and he sort of said, well, that might be something that's kind of comparable. And he says, but that's like $160,000 more. It's like twice the money. And he sort of sits there and says, is it twice the car? No, I'll just happily keep the one I've got, thanks. And basically, I think like most other people, I search overseas websites to see what other cars are for sale and what's going on and what's happening. And being a right-hand drive market, spend a lot of time, probably like you do, on piston heads. Yep. And there was basically...
So when did you get this car? How long ago was this? How long ago did you buy it?
October last year. I might have brought it beforehand. I think it landed in October.
I'm trying to work out, and I do look at this, and I can't even think of the current price in the UK. As you know, I'm in the UK at the moment, and I always look at Auto Trader UK. But they're not that common either in the UK. They're quite hard to find, aren't they? A 997 GTS. I still think the manual ones, yeah, the manual ones especially, and they are. I still see them as, you know, let's just compare it to the Sport Classic, even though it's a different car. The 997 GTS is still underrated. It's still, you know, you can still get them at an okay price. I remember the last time I was looking, I thought they were around £70,000. Am I wrong? Is that how much they cost?
Yeah, they are. They were pushing at the peak of that we'll call it the Porsche bubble. You know, 18 months ago, 2 years ago, I think they might have been pushing £75,000. You know, and I think when they do come up for sale now, they're probably about £65,000, £65,000.
Does New Zealand have luxury car tax as per Australia? So if you import this in, you have to pay duty and luxury car tax. You just pay duty, so it's just like a GST duty, is it?
Correct. Yeah, GST. So the formula in New Zealand is you basically do the currency conversion, and you pay 15%. You import the car. So by the time you've imported the car and complied it and paid all the insurances and everything along the way, it's probably about 10 grand Kiwi on top of the purchase price. Okay. And then you pay GST of 15% over the top of everything. So like if you took my GTS, for example, I got lucky on that one. I sourced it through a UK broker, a car sourcing person, and he found it privately, and I got it for a pretty good price at the time. I think I got it for £62,000.
That's good.
And the New Zealand dollar was pretty high at the moment. That was kind of when Brexit was in and the pound was really soft. And
PDK versions I noticed when they came up in Australia on car sales, and there was only a couple. And this is PDK, which is obviously not the same value, I don't think, as the manual. And they were hitting 200k Australian. They were around 200k Australian, I think, at one point there. Yeah. The last one that came up was 200, 210, something Australian. So they're getting up there now.
Yeah, spectacular money. I think in New Zealand, the PDK 997s sell for about 120, 130 Kiwi. So by the time you converted that to Aussie, it's about 110 Aussie.
Yeah, I know, which is so much cheaper. Yeah, I know, it's crazy. It's crazy. What are the importing? I'm trying to think now. What are the importing rules from New Zealand to Australia? Australia still has the cap. It's still difficult with Australia because of the age of the car. And if you're not, I think,
isn't that about to change in Australia? I think it's 25 years, but aren't they about to change that now? And all of that sort of is going to drop in the near future.
Yeah, I know they have been talking about it. I'm not sure if it has actually gone through.
Because it'll be interesting, because 964s and 993s in New Zealand kind of sit in that 25-year period now, and they sell for a lot less money in New Zealand than they do in Australia. So it'll be interesting to see whether Australians start poaching cars out of New Zealand.
So I always thought, and I used to have business relationships with people in New Zealand, and I always thought that the cars in New Zealand in general were more expensive than Australia. Is that new cars only? Is it? I always thought they were much more expensive. I remember someone bought an RS4 and I thought it was quite a lot of money. Maybe I was mistaken. So they're not as expensive as a new car in new cars in New Zealand in general.
I'd have to be careful. I'd have to do a bit of research on that one. I'm not sure. I don't think there's too much of a difference. The thing is, the new cars are a bit tricky because on the new cars you've got to factor the volume of cars that are being sold, and New Zealand's a smaller market than Australia.
Right.
But I do know with used cars, because you can't import used cars into Australia so easy, all you can do is buy the ones that are there. Whereas in New Zealand, you can basically pull a car out of the UK. So
that's great. That's a great alternative.
Yeah. So all you're doing is you're taking the New Zealand, you're taking the British pound price of the car at the moment,
Yep.
multiplying it by 2 to put it into Kiwi dollars, adding $10,000 to put it on a container and getting it here, and then putting a 15% tax across the top of it.
So I think that's sorry, Paul. I think that's pretty similar. I mean, I've been looking at 912s, and I've been looking at other cars here in the UK. And I think when I go into some site that I found, some shipping site, and they give you the whole details for Australia, I think it's about the same, except Australia puts that luxury car tax on if it's over 60,000 or whatever it is. So they give you another bump of money you have to pay. But that's if it's 30 years old. If it's under 30 years old, then you have to pay a lot more. Unless it's on the exception. Australia has that exception list, which I think the 360 Modena's on it, and there's a few cars on it. I forget what it's called, special register or something, where there's certain cars you don't have to live in the UK. It doesn't have to be over 30 years old, and you can still import them into Australia. So that's, I know there's some cars on that list, but it's very limited. It's a very limited list. There's not a lot of cars on there. I think the 360 is probably one of the few that you would actually buy. I just want to talk about, because I think the 997 GTS is a great car. Like, I have to say, owning a 997, it's one of those, and especially, and like I said, in Australia, I don't even look at them that much because they are PDK. But the manual ones, like in the UK here, I think they're just a fantastic looking 997, like you said. So sorry.
I was just going to say, they're devastatingly quick on B roads. They're kind of the polar opposite of the GT3, because the thing I really like about the car is it's actually the suspension and its ride. It rides really, really well, and it just carries bumps and B roads and curves and things just beautifully. You can boogie on a B road and not bounce around the road. I can find that in my car. I can keep up with 992s and 991s and things, pretty easily. Although they're faster cars, so it travels well on a B road. The other thing I really, really like about it, I don't know if the gearing's special. I'd have to check it if it's any different to like a 997.2 C2S, but
it's a short shifter, right? The GTS is a short shifter.
Yeah, but the third, fourth and fifth gears are really close. So like in the GT3, you get like a huge rev drop between the gears. You'd really notice it.
Right.
But I find in this car, you can be doing like 100 kilometers an hour, and the difference between third and fourth gear is only like 300 or 400 RPM, and the difference between fourth and fifth is only sort of 300 or 400 RPM. So you can kind of, when you're grabbing the gears and going through the gears, it's like, it's a rapid torque response. It's like, you feel like it's like a close ratio gearbox.
Okay.
And I just really like it when you sort of get on it a little bit, and those gears on are close together. So I really like that. I've done a couple of months to it. But
is the GTS now up there with one of the favorite Porsches you've owned?
Yeah, I do. As far as modern Porsches go, yeah. Because it is kind of I think it's a pretty car, and it's just it's a little bit special with the X51 engine. It's got 400 horsepower.
Yeah, fantastic.
So it'll boogie, and it looks special. I think I know everything is a GTS now. You can get a GTS in all the Porsche models and whatnot, but when Porsche did that one, that was sort of like the first of the GTSs, and it was like a special run-out car, and it was. I know it was them going through taking a C2S, putting a wide body on it, and ticking a whole lot of options at a discounted rate to achieve something that was special. But the sum of all those parts make it something quite special, I think.
I agree.
To my knowledge, it's basically the same running gear and same car as a sport classic or a speedster of the time. It's the same wide body, gear, suspension, etc. So
I think that's the point, though, Paul. I think that's the crucial point that you just said, and I was going to mention it when I was trying to overtalk you. Then, think of the Sport Classic, think of the Speedster, the 997 Speedster. This is what the GTS is. It was the same time. It's being done at the same time. It was the last of the 997s, right? It was done at the end of the run, and the Sport Classic is the one in the UK that was up for auction a couple of weeks ago, which didn't sell at auction. I noticed, I think it's the same one that's gone to a dealer. I think it's about £239,000. But I think at that auction, they wanted something like £280,000 estimate. But there is one selling for $230,000, so they're not getting the money. I mean, Speedster's a different thing. Speedsters, everyone wants a Speedster now. But That's what I keep thinking, that, the 997 GTS is, and it was special at the time because the GTS variant wasn't really as, it wasn't through all the models as it is now. It was like
Yeah.
that special car, and I still think it is a really collectible car. It's one of those 997s that you really don't want to. It's a car you want to hang on to, Paul. That car. It really
Yeah.
is a car you want to hang on to, don't you think?
Yeah, I agree. So my car's even got a little bit, it's the 2-wheel drive version. It's not the 4-wheel drive version.
Yeah, which is even better.
It's a very light car, so it's not got a sunroof. It's actually quite light on options. I think some Porsche purists would probably want a car that's probably more highly optioned than my car. It doesn't have the extended leather through it. It's basically, I guess what I'm trying to say is it's a performance-focused car. It's only got two options. One is it's got an LSD in it, which is not common in them, and it's got white dials instead of black. And from what I can see, those are the only two special options when someone's gone through it. When I first got it, it didn't even have Sport Chrono in it, but it's a software package that you can buy. I've actually put it in the car. I haven't put the clock on the dash. I'm actually not personally a fan of the clock on the dash, but I've put the
the software update. The software update.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that does sharpen the car. I did notice it. It's not to the same degree as like a PDK. When you've got Sport Chrono and a PDK, it's like, holy cow! You put it in Sport Plus, and it's like it's like day and night. Whereas in a manual, or in my manual car, and I've also heard or read similar feedback from other people around the world with these cars. When you put the pack in, it's not a night and day difference, but it does. It just sharpens it a little bit.
It sharpens the throttle response, doesn't it? I was looking at this actually for my car, where you get the software. It's a software update, and you get the panel on your dash, and it has the sport button, right? Which
it's worth it. So,
and they say it works better with PDK, but with the manual, they said it does actually change. It obviously works better when you've got a sports exhaust, though, doesn't it, as well? Which I'm sure. Does your car have the Porsche sports exhaust?
Yes,
option?
It does. It does have the sports exhaust. Yeah.
And that's what turned me against not getting that option for my base Carreras, because my car didn't have the PSE. And I did read. You don't think it makes a difference?
I still do it. Yeah, no, I'd still do it because it sharpens this accelerator, and it also sharpens the handling. You just notice it. You feel it. It's more nimble. It's more agile. And sometimes I wonder, and maybe this is just me and my naivety and wishful thinking. Is look, when the car's not in sport mode, and because I'll lead on to a couple of other mods that I did. I'll start from the beginning. So when I first bought the car, I thought it was wonderful. When I drove it, so I brought this car sight unseen. It was basically, I relied on a broker in the UK to source it for me. He took literally 101 photos. I took it to an OPC. I got them to do a inspection on it. It had a full OPC history, and I kind of had confidence with all of that to buy something sight unseen, because I don't have 2 weeks to go to the UK and run all over the countryside trying to find a car. And then once you've brought a car, figure out how I take it somewhere to a port to put it on a boat and get it to New Zealand. It's just I don't have the luxury of that time. So I used a broker. I brought a car sight unseen, and I'm quite a conservative guy and a bit of a fussy guy when it comes to cars. So that was a big leap for me. But
is that the first time you've done that? Bought a car sight unseen? It's the first time.
Yes, it is.
And the broker organized, just for people that are interested, so the broker organized, he found the car for you, he charges you an X amount of fee or whatever to do this, and he organizes all the export paperwork and shipping and everything. Correct. He has a shipping company that he uses.
Yeah, and it's a brilliant service. So basically, with him, you basically sit there and say, I've seen something in piston heads and it's sitting in a dealership, or it's sitting in the middle of nowhere. Can you go have a look at it? And you have to pay for them for the day to jump in their car and go and look at it and eyeball it. And they'll sit there and send you some photos and take it for a drive and give you an opinion. And then from there, basically I had to pay for him to take it to an OPC and get it up on a hoist and go through it forwards and backwards and make sure it hadn't had accident damage. Or being a UK car, there wasn't any signs of rust. It's, mine's a 2011. So when I bought it, it was kind of an 8-year-old car. So it's not new, but it's not old. It's kind of been there long enough where it could be starting to get signs of rust. And so basically, you want them to go through it forwards and backwards and make sure it's a good car. And then basically they even handle the payment for you. So basically I give them the money, they pay for it, they get the title of it, and then basically they take the car, they got it groomed and cleaned so that you don't, so when you because it can't have dirt and stuff underneath it. It's got to be clean when it comes into the country for for quarantine sort of inspections.
Sorry, Paul.
So
how do you find that this person you found? There's a lot of trust involved here. I mean, people hearing this story, you're going, well, there's a lot of trust. You're sending him the money. You're trusting his experience with the car. So how did you find this person? Was it someone that a friend had used before, or did you read it on a forum?
Through word of mouth. So he'd brought cars in for other friends of mine in New Zealand, and basically I saw the quality of a couple of cars that he brought in, and I kind of got to live the process, vicariously through other friends, and what cars got turned down and why, and basically that. And when I saw a car that was an older car, this was a 2010 Boxster Spider, because again, there's only a couple of those in New Zealand, and if you want one, it's not going to magically appear, whereas you can go and jump on piston heads and there's 5 of them for sale.
Yeah.
So basically, he brought that in, and I got to look at that car, and I was like, gosh, it's in really good condition and a really good car, and I would own that. So, I kind of, and he gave rave reviews on the process. So I kind of got trust, if that makes sense, through someone else going first. I wasn't the guinea pig.
Okay.
So it was, when you live in countries where there's very few Porsches, certainly older ones, it's easier to get a new one, because a new one you can order whatever you like. But
so your car arrived, and you were, obviously there was no problem with it at all, right?
No, we've got really stringent registration rules in New Zealand. The cars have got to be original, unmodified, no rust, no nothing. The car sailed through. Perfect.
So
it was a very easy process.
And for people who are listening to this from, Australia or New Zealand and are thinking, I mean, I'm lucky at the moment because I'm in the UK and I just sort of scour things and think I can go and have a look at it if I want to. But I know it's a difficult process, and it's a difficult thing to trust someone. So it's good that you have a recommendation. That other people have used this person and they work really well. With the fee side of it, is it? And I don't want you to divulge how much you paid for the guy, but I mean, the fee side of it, is it a set fee, as in a dollar amount, including traveling, or do you work it out like a percentage of the cost of the car? How are the fees for this sort of service? Are they expensive?
It was a flat fee for him to buy the car on your behalf, and then I think you pay him a per time fee for him to go and have a look at a car. So have the car. So I think he's based in the south of London. So if he's having a look at something that's only 30 minutes up the road, he probably look at it in a couple of hours. And but if you're sending him to Scotland or the top of England, and he's got to jump on a plane or spend a day there, I think that first inspection, what I'm trying to say, is commensurate to his effort. But once you buy a car, I believe it's a flat fee. So I can only explain on 2 cars that I've seen, my friends and mine. If it was a $500,000 car or $1 million car, I'm not sure if the fee would be more, but it's to my knowledge, it's not a percentage of the purchase price.
Okay, perfect. So I want to let's. So you have I want to go back to the 87. I want to go back to the 87 3.2 that you have, the red one. Yeah. And I want you to tell the listeners, because I know this already, and I'd like to tell you, at the time when this car came out, the 87, and I'm guessing the other car you have in your garage, which I am a fan of, and and I'm a big fan of them. In fact, it's very funny you sent me that image, because and all my Porsche friends are going to be upset with me as well, I'm sure, when I say this, but I have actually been just watching the values of those in the UK compared to the US. So tell the listeners what you bought, and then I want to know the comparison, because we're talking about the same era here and almost cars that were in competition with each other in a way with the two. And I'm guessing yours is a pre-ABS or it's an ABS version?
Pre-ABS, yeah. So I have another car in my stable. So at the moment I've got the G50 Carrera and the 997 GTS. The other car I've got in my stable at the moment is a 1987 Ferrari 328 GTS. So
which is beautiful. Yeah. Beautiful car.
So I love Ferrari 308s/328s too. When I was a kid, that was the Ferrari. I watched Magnum PI with my dad, for several years, and
same as me, Paul. It's one of those cars. It's just the time when you're growing up.
Yeah, you've nailed it on the head. So look, I know Countachs and Testarossas and things are the supercars of that era. But to my eye, a Ferrari 308 was just a thing of beauty and something that I lusted after and something I had Matchbox toys and built models of as a kid. And, when I was 12 years old and 328s were the car of that era. I remember building the Tamiya model or whatever it was. And it was just something that I lusted after. It's just something that moves me. So I've always wanted, as much as I love Porsches, I've always wanted a 308/328 Ferrari. I would love a Ferrari 2416 as well, or a 512, but they're kind of unobtainium for me. And so I kind of had reached a point in life where I could get one. So I got one. I actually got, with my wife's permission, I actually got the 328 just after I got the 997. So I think I brought the 997. I think I brought it in about June 2019, but it took about 3 months to get here. And then the 328.
Did you source that from New Zealand, or did you source it out of the US or the UK?
No, it came from New Zealand. So, the one that I ultimately want is a 308 GTS QV. That's the perfect poster car. But in New Zealand, there are only 8 of those, I think, something like that. And they just never come up for sale. So basically, I've spent the best part of 10 years, twice a week on piston heads, searching 308s and dreaming of going over there one day for a holiday and buying one and bringing one back because they can't be had here. And the problem with that is that as much as that's a romantic dream, I don't have 2 weeks to go over there and do that and then find out I'm disappointed because everything looks pretty in a photo and we put it up on a hoist, it's full of rust. And so a long story short, there was it's actually an Australian new car that was brought by a New Zealander who brought it into New Zealand as a tourist delivery.
Okay.
But it's a UK spec car. It's not an Australian spec Ferrari. It doesn't have cats in it. And
okay.
And so basically, there's a car that's...
How did that happen?
We don't know. It's a really, really interesting mystery. We think the original owner of the car has now passed away, so we don't know the full story behind it. But he brought the car in 1987. It's got a service stamp at the local Ferrari dealer in Australia with 1,500 kilometres on it. He also owned a freight company he's based in New Zealand, but he owned a freight company where he would transport things to Australia, the islands, and America. And the car has a bit more of an interesting story because we know it was in Australia for the first year or two, and then it's not registered in New Zealand until 1993, and we think somewhere between 88, 89 and 1993 it spent time in America because the guy that was the other end of his business when he was importing items. So it went to America, and there's folklore from people who kind of knew him in the car back then that it never got used in America because he used to get pulled over for being in a right-hand drive car in a left-hand drive country, and they couldn't quite figure that out. And then basically it came back to New Zealand, and he sold it about 5 years ago. And then I actually remember it coming up for sale at the time, but it was sort of beyond my means back then. And then it kind of went through a couple of hands, and the hands it went through were people. One of them was in the Porsche club, so I kind of knew him. Right. And then it went to a guy who was into Ferraris, and I kind of met him at a car show, and we just sort of started talking, and we did a swap one day where he let me drive his 328 and I let him drive the 3.2 Carrera as a comparison. And there's a bit of a funny story there because he ended up selling the 328 to buy one of these New Zealand GTSs in PDK after driving my one, and then I went to the dealership 3 or 4 weeks later and brought his Ferrari. So
perfect.
Yeah, so it's very incestuous.
I think it's interesting talking about Ferrari on when we're talking about Porsches all the time, because it is the competitor in a way, and it was in the 80s. It was people were buying, I guess, your 3.2. Some people had the SC. I mean, SC's a little bit earlier, and then the 308, 328. So it's a comparable, and it seems now at the moment those prices of a 328, and I'm not saying about the price of yours, but the 328, whether in the US, I mean, the ones that come up on Bring a Trailer, I mean, some of them are at 40, which are probably not great, but they seem to range from like 40 to 70,000 US dollars. And there's a lot in that middle 50 to 55,000 US dollar mark. just to give people an idea that don't know much about the values. And then in the UK, it seems like there's a whole heap at the moment that are for sale for around £59,000. £59,000 once you get it into Australia is about probably 130,000 Australian dollars. And to put this into perspective, I don't know whether you saw it or you're looking at other car sales in Australia very often, but there was a 328 that came up for sale there 2 weeks ago, a red one, and it sold pretty quickly, and it was a UK import, and they wanted 165 for it. I think it had about 50,000 kilometers on it, and that was 165. But then the market, like Porsche market, there's always the extremes, and there's also another one which is still sitting there, which is a low mileage example. I think it's a non-ABS as well. It could be an ABS, but they want 330,000 Australian dollars for it. So there's a big gap. There's a big gap there when you're looking at these cars, and I guess it's the same as Porsche. But for someone who is so passionate about Porsche and you have a Ferrari, what is it like when you've driven the 3.2, Paul, and then you drive the 328? Is there similarities, or are they completely miles apart? And I think that's what a lot of people listening would be interested in.
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's a question that everybody asks me, which one's better and which one do you like more, and all of those, all those types of questions. So how do I answer that? So
as a driving experience, as the feeling when you're sitting in that car, does the Ferrari feel more special?
Yeah, it does. So to answer that question, the Porsche is a better built car. The Porsche would be faster around town. It's lighter, it's more nimble, it puts the power down quicker.
Do you feel too conspicuous in the Ferrari? A lot of people say that. I know. Steve's uncle had one, and he had a 430. Sorry, Steve's uncle had a 430, and he sold it recently, and bought a 911 again. And it was because you are a little bit conspicuous. You are a little bit on show all the time. Do you feel that, or you feel like with an older car, an older 80s one, it's not as bad?
So people know it's a Ferrari because it's a quintessential Ferrari shape. Everybody thinks that Magnum type era car is what a Ferrari should look like to a certain age. I think with a modern Ferrari, unless it's painted red and got prancing horses all over it, you might not necessarily know it's a Ferrari. Could be a Maserati. So people know it's a Ferrari because it's a quintessential Ferrari shape from basically close to a 20-year period. You do get photos. So like you'll stop at the lights and you'll get someone sit there and pull out their iPhone and take a photo of it, or you'll drive down the motorway and you'll like picture somebody taking photos out the side of it. When you first get it, it's a novelty. After a while, the novelty wears off pretty quickly. But then I remember, before I owned this car, when I used to see one, my heart would skip a beat and I'd get excited. And if I saw one on the side of the road, I'd photograph it. So I get why people who love these cars, why they do that. So I guess to describe the difference, and look, an out-and-out speed, the Ferrari's probably got the legs on the 3.2 Carrera. On twisty roads, the Carrera would probably have the Ferrari. But I think as a driving experience, if I'm honest with you, I'd go for the keys to the Ferrari first.
Right.
Although I would sell the Ferrari first before the Carrera. I know I'm sounding like I'm
why is that?
But
why would you do that?
Okay, so
because it is flashy, because it does come across as not flashy, but because you are on show.
The Carrera is a harder car for me to replace because it's hard to get a New Zealand new one that's got, basically original paint and an original interior and one of that quality. Whereas you could pull a nice 328 out of the UK pretty quickly. You've just got to.
You're right, actually.
You've got to find the money, but it's not a hard thing to get.
Yeah.
And the 3.2 Carrera is a trip down memory lane, and I have family memories, with Dad having them as a kid, and it's just.
Paul, I didn't ask you. Your father still has Porsches, or he doesn't have Porsches anymore?
Not at this given moment in time. He has on and off. So he had a Cayman until about 12 months ago.
And does he enjoy driving yours? I guess you let him drive the 3.2.
Yeah. I don't get much say in the matter. He just called me and goes for the keys. So, at which point I sat there and said, let me get it out of the driveway. I'll pull it out on the street and I'll point it in the right direction and you can go for a drive. But yeah. So no, he's still very. I mean, he's getting older now, and they're not necessarily easy things to drive by modern day standards. But
yep.
but yeah.
The
But
other thing I'm really interested in, and I think people who are is the run. And I know this podcast isn't long enough now. We've actually run a bit over time because your story is so great, and I usually keep these to an hour, and we're about an hour and 20. So I hope you don't have anywhere to go. But
okay.
the Ferrari and the running costs, and I was reading something only a couple of nights ago here. I was reading something, and it could have been on Ferrari chat, and it could have been an old chat, and it was about the cost of servicing Ferraris compared to 80s 911s. And I think someone was saying that it was very similar, especially with the 328, not with the 355. The 355 they reckon is a lot more expensive to upkeep, but the 328 is a reasonably reliable Ferrari. It's reasonably inexpensive to run, and someone put the cost of like servicing and cam belt prices and whatever and like that. It was a few years old, this thread. It wasn't a new thread. Is it comparable, the running cost of a 3.2 Carrera, say, for example, and a 328 Ferrari?
I'm not sure. I think to answer that question on reliability and cost of keeping a car, I think the trick is, regardless of whether it's Porsche or Ferrari, you've got to buy one that's a good one, that's been loved and comes with receipts. Either car will be expensive if it's got delayed maintenance. When I brought my car, I was lucky enough that I brought it through the local Ferrari dealer, and they, as a rule of thumb, they change the belts, they give it a full service inside and out, and they go through it. And so my car, with a full service, all the oils changed, a cam belt service, front discs done. They found a few other bits and pieces when they crawled through it. I didn't pay this, but it was obviously factored into the purchase price. It came with a service bill of $7,000 New Zealand.
Okay.
So that was them doing a whole lot of preventative and maintenance on it. So I've owned the car now for a year and a bit, and when I took it in for its annual service, it needed nothing doing to it, and the service bill was $700 New Zealand. So I'm going to jinx myself saying this.
So that's like a 997 service price, 700. That's just a minor normal service, right? 700 New Zealand.
So I'm going to jinx myself saying this, but the Ferrari's the car I've done the most miles in this year. I think I've done about 3,500 kilometers in it.
Right.
Out of cars, and it's been the cheapest one for me to own. The service on the 3.2 and the 997 GTS were more than that.
Yeah, see, this is the thing. A lot of people are going to find that really surprising, and I've only just found it recently when I've been looking at things online and just looking into it. But we are talking about a Ferrari that is known to be slightly more reliable, right? We have to say that. And like you said, you bought a good example. It's like anything, like a Porsche as well. You buy good examples. You don't spend that much. And I always harp on about the fact that a 911, if you don't own one, they're not that expensive to own. The 997 has not been an expensive car to own. In fact, my Audi I had before, as I always said, I used to pay more for service and more for things in the Audi than I do for the 911.
Yeah,
of course, when you have to replace clutches and things like that, you get into higher money, but it's not.
Yeah.
I don't think it's crazy money for either a 911 or a Ferrari. Is it? It's not crazy money.
No, I don't think so. It's funny you say that, because I was toing and froing over a 355, which I could get in New Zealand. There was like a really nice example that I found with it was the one with the 3-spoke steering wheel, and it had the black interior, and it was red exterior. And I personally wanted a GTS because I don't ever drive the car with a roof on. It's just the way I use the car. And this one was a New Zealand new, and it just ticked all the ticks. And it's funny you say that, because one of the things that kind of held me back was the fear of big car bills with the maintenance of that. At the time, I was looking at another 355, and when you went through the service history of it, somebody 12 months ago had spent $17,000 New Zealand on getting that car serviced, and I was just like,
wow.
So I'm used to car bills because I take cars to the track and modify them. So I'm someone who is used to throwing money at cars, and I know I'm good at car bills. It's not something that no one ever likes giving away money, but you'll get some people who spend no money on cars, and you get some people who are used to car bills through consumables and track days, etc. So I'm not afraid of spending money. I'm used to it.
Yep.
I was kind of sitting there saying, do I really want to own a car that doesn't go to the track and in 3 years' time have a 10K service bill? How am I gonna feel? It'd have to be if work was a little bit lean at that particular moment in time, I'd probably be a bit grumpy cutting a check for that sort of money. So,
Yeah.
so that did spin things more towards a 328. Because I'm aware that it is a cheaper car to run. But I think the advice that I'd give to people, and I've learnt this through the school of hard knocks, is you just pay the money and get the very best car you can. The one with all the receipts, the one that's had the previous owner that's lavished the cash on it, and it's got the latest tires, and they've just cherished it, loved it, and done the suspension and done. Look, the car might be $10,000 more, than one that's average, but you can't take an average car and turn it into what that person's got. So just buy the best one you can, because it'll be the cheapest ownership experience, and you'll get the money back at the sale end of it.
Exactly. But you might think, it may make you think about it when you're paying that extra 10,000 or 15,000, but when you get the car and it arrives, you'll feel much better about it. True, Paul, you'll feel much better about that you have actually bought a better example, and it will pay off in the long run anyway. So, and I think that's a key point. Look, Paul, I think you have a fantastic garage, and I think a lot of people are going to be envious when they finish listening to this podcast. The 997 GTS is a beautiful car. I have, I'm a fan. The 3.2 Carrera, the G50 is also another fantastic 911. That and the SC, I'm fans of both of them. And then you've got the 328 Ferrari. So you've got a nice mix of cars there to have fun with on the weekend. That's for sure.
Yeah, thank you.
So we might have to end the podcast because we've actually gone over today, Paul. So thanks for staying around for longer. It's actually an hour and a half.
Yeah. Because
your story is so great. But I just want to ask you, if someone comes to New Zealand, and I always ask this question no matter where people are in the world, you come to New Zealand, is there a favorite road near where you live, or is there a great road in New Zealand that you would say to people, if you come to New Zealand, hire a 911 or get your car or just get a car or a friend's car and drive around? What is the pick of the roads you think in New Zealand? I know it's a tricky one.
Oh, you got to drive to South Island. So you've got to drive. You've got me on the spot now with what I call that area, but you drive basically south of Christchurch and all in and around the South Island and Queenstown and Wanaka and that Southern Alps area. And the South Island roads in New Zealand you feel like you're driving in the Swiss Alps. There's very few cars on the road. You've got those mountain tops. You've got spectacular scenery, and you feel like you're driving through the set of Lord of the Rings. It's got a road on it. You're the only thing on it, and you're in a convoy of Porsches. You might be breaking the speed limit by 5 kilometers an hour, and it's just heaven on earth. It's just magic. It's nothing better than being in a convoy in Porsches and doing those roads and there's like literally hours of it. But the great thing about New Zealand is there are lots of great roads. It just depends on where you are in the country and where you want to go. But my favorite roads are definitely the south, just best roads in the world.
Fantastic. Great tip. So Paul, I haven't asked you actually, do you have an Instagram or anywhere where people can see your cars, or you don't have, you have any social media sites where people can go and look at the cars?
Facebook page. There's probably got family photos on it than car photos. I kind of play the cars down a little bit, but no, I don't. But I don't mind sharing with you some of my car photos and putting them up on yours.
Yep. I have a couple of photos, so I'll put the photo on when we put the podcast up, and when I put it on YouTube, and the audio only goes on YouTube, and I'll get a couple of photos. Maybe I'll get a couple of photos from Paul for the listeners, and so the listeners can see it, and I'll put it on my Instagram when this podcast goes live on next Tuesday. Is there anything else you want to tell the listeners today, Paul? I mean, I think you've got a great story. You've got a great car collection.
Yeah, two things. I think one thing that we didn't touch on today, and you could talk for hours, is I think the greatest joy that I get out of Porsches is the community and the experiences. So, just touching on it super quickly, I've been to Australia, the Rensports, a couple of times. I went to Rensport Reunion in 2018 in San Francisco, and if it wasn't for COVID, I would have gone to the Porsche factory this year. So there are the biggest thing out of me is the cars. Once you get beyond the cars, it's the community and the people, and the friends. And the other quick thing I'd just like to say is, I just want to thank you for this podcast. The thing that I really enjoy about it is they're kind of like normal Porsche people. It's not Seinfeld or Magnus Walker or somebody with, those guys are great people and we all aspire to be them. But I like the fact that they are normal people with Porsches, but, with an equal passion.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, no, I agree. The community of Porsche is great. And doing this podcast, seriously, I guess from when COVID started in March, it has been great. It has been really a great experience. Meeting you today, I've met so many people from around the world. I get so many messages and so many people passionate about the brand and passionate about people that want to get into the brand, people who've just bought their first 911. I'm getting lots of messages from people that have bought 996s. People are wanting to get in the brand for so long and they've bought their first 911 and it's a 996. And it's just fantastic. It's just a fantastic community, like you said, and there's so many events. And I'm with you. That's what I was planning to do this year as well. Actually, I was planning to do it in summer, but we couldn't, obviously. Go to the Porsche factory when it was open, not in summer, but when it's open, and do that factory tour. Because I'm yet to go to Stuttgart and I'm yet to go to the Porsche Museum. So that's on my list as well for sure. And maybe even get one of those hire one of those 911s, Paul, through the Porsche Drive program where you can pick them up, where you can pick it up at the factory. Now I know how to drive left-hand drive after being in Bahrain. I don't have a problem with left-hand drive. But I think that'd be a fantastic thing to do, that collection at the factory and have a car for 2 days and drive around the area there.
Yeah, you got to do these things. They're just bucket list things that sort of enrich in your life. They're life experiences that you can't otherwise get, I think.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for being on the podcast, Paul. It's been great. So as Paul said, Paul's from New Zealand. He's got 3 great cars. He's also the president of the Porsche Club of New Zealand, correct?
Correct.
And we'll put some of those pictures up in the Instagram. But I just want to say thanks everyone for listening. This podcast has been slightly long today. I hope you guys are still at the end and you're listening, because it was a great story from Paul. Great car collection. And thank you so much, Paul.
Thank you. Have a good night.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.